you very much for being here. Another good turnout tonight. Appreciate you coming. I think we're in for a special treat tonight with a very, very special guest. He's been successful in business, politics, and in his personal life. After starting and selling a home health care management business, he became the mayor of Nashville. Served from 1991 to 1999, during which time he was very instrumental in recruiting the Titans pro football team to Nashville, the Predators pro hockey team to Nashville. And one of the things I appreciate most is I see it every day walking to and from work. He created a world-class library downtown with a legacy architectural style, which is a very incredible asset for this city. He served as governor from 2003 to 2011, during which time the state made dramatic strides in health care, education, and economic development. He's been married to Andrea Conte, who is a guest tonight. Sorry. All right, here. Okay, good. Force in her own right, and perhaps a guest for a future, now that you asked. They have a son, a daughter-in-law, and a granddaughter, Parker, that we may hear a little more about before the night goes. And so join me now in welcoming a very special guest, Governor Bill Bredesen. As I explained to the governor backstage, this will be very casual, very informal. Appreciate all of you being here. At some point, I'll turn to you for questions. So be thinking about what you want to know about the governor that you don't know, and we'll take time for that at the appropriate time. Let's talk Nashville first, though. I want to get to who you are, but let's talk Nashville. When did you first come to Nashville?
And I came to Nashville in late 1975, and she had a job here, and I didn't. So I followed her down to Nashville, and she supported me for a while. She still reminds me of that occasionally.
You were newlywed?
We were just married. I've been working in Ingram for an American company over there. She came over, we got married, and just outside of Oxford.
Reflecting on your time as mayor, what does give you the greatest pleasure thinking about today?
I know. I think just, I really think what I said earlier about trying to, convince people that we could do a lot more, and seeing the fruits of some of that. I mean, we got General Hospital moved over to the Meharry campus. We got the library, the downtown library, a bunch of new libraries built. It's not so visible today, but we built a number of new schools. I mean, really ramped up the physical side of the education system here. And, I think Nashville, it was a nice, I look back on it and think I was just really lucky that you had someone from a different background than I think many of the previous mayors, certainly, quite obviously not from the city. The word carpetbagger was used on occasion. And so on. And you just had a nice combination of the city was ready to move in a new direction, and you had somebody around who wanted to do those kinds of things, and it was a nice kind of coming together of opportunities.
Well, I think we're all glad you carpetbagged.
Well, not all.
Not all. If you were mayor next, and Nashville's very early beginning to think about its next mayor, what would be your first priority looking at Nashville's future?
It sounds like an easy answer because people worked on it so hard. I just think the whole K through 12, pre-K through 12 education system, I mean, that really has, it's just got to move up a couple notches to really keep the growth going in Nashville the way it has been. There's some real bright spots in it, but there's also some real, some real problems. And the kind of things that are going on now with, the school board and trying to improve things, I think are all very good. But that to me would be the biggest limiting factor in our sort of future growth and success that I can see out there right this instant.
Any counsel to all of us who are already becoming consumed with who's the next mayor going to be? what we should be looking for?
Choose wisely. So, no, I mean, I really think, I mean, I've been a big admirer of Mayor Dean. I think he came in with a lot of sort of issues that were pregnant, that were ready to be decided. I think the previous mayor had many times kind of pushed those down the road a little bit, and I have to say, he sat down and he just made his calls. And there were things that had to be done that were tough with the Predators and the arena there. Obviously, the whole issue of the Music City Center and that was right on the table. And I think he's done a good job of that. I just say, find somebody who's willing to, take some arrows and stand up and do some things. And if we can find that, I think Nashville will keep moving. If you just find a caretaker or somebody who's going to be timid about that, or who wants to use it as a stepping stone to run for Congress or run for Senate or something like that, then I think we'll have a problem.
Okay. Let's go back to the beginning. Mm-hmm. Where did Phil Bredesen come from? Where did it all start?
Well, I was born in New Jersey on an Army base. My father was a captain in the Army, and we lived in a number of places, including briefly Atlanta, back before I can remember it. So I have some slight southern roots, which I can call on. And then my family broke up when I was 7. And my mother and my brother and myself moved back in with my grandmother in Shortsville, New York, where I'm from, which is a town of, it was at the time about 1,150 people, and it's grown to a full 1,300 now, up in the Finger Lakes region in New York State. And I went to the local public high school there, Red Jacket Central. It was a school district with one school, a K through 12 school in a single building, and it actually still is.
And what grade were you in when you moved there?
I would have been in 3rd grade when I moved there, in 3rd grade. I spent the first 2 years in that.
It was 1st through 12?
It was a 1 through 12 school, and I'd spent the first 2 years in the Boston area, in Arlington, Massachusetts, which is where my family had lived when things came apart.
So what was life like in that small town?
It was great. I mean, I loved it. I've often described to people in politics, I sometimes don't hew perfectly to the Democratic line on things, nor would I hew to the Republican line if I were one of those. But I've often described I've often described
bear it like that
with apologies. But I've often I'm sure my politics are probably more small town than they are, traditional Democrat or traditional Republican, and the kind of values, things that I value, are I think those kind of typical values. It's kind of a combination of, I mean, there's this kind of liberal sense of community, and we're all in it together, but still a lot of belief in self-reliance and family, and it really is kind of an amalgam of, I think, some different views of the world.
Favorite memory growing up?
I was completely an outdoors person. I used to, when I got home from school, I put my fishing rod over the handlebars of the bike and headed out to go down fishing. And I think all of those times growing up, when you just spent out traipsing around in the woods and fishing and hunting, and those things would easily be my favorite memories.
Mayberry.
Yeah.
Still hunting fish?
Still do, much less than I did when I was 12, but yeah, still enjoy that. And
siblings? You had brothers, sisters?
I had one younger brother who has passed away. He was 4 years younger than myself. He lived in Shortsville basically all his life, and then from my father's subsequent marriages, I have some half-brothers and sisters who I don't know particularly well, but I have them, and one of them, who's the oldest in the next family, Dale, is a doctor on the West Coast, and Andrew and I have gotten to know he and his wife quite well over the years.
Greatest influence growing up?
I think just the family situation. My grandmother had a 4th grade education. And I had an aunt and an uncle who lived we had the house we had growing up for the first part was the 3 of us, my mother and her 2 kids, and an aunt and an uncle who lived there, and then my grandmother who was a widow. And they were all, they were all very, I guess what I call down to earth people. They remind me in a lot of ways of people who live in rural Tennessee. And I think one of the reasons I ended up, after I got my head together running for governor, I ended up doing well in those parts of the state, were just because it was such a natural place for me. But my grandmother, she was a widow, and she took in sewing. That was what she did for a living. She had a sewing machine and took in sewing. My uncle was a milkman, and I just think, man, I just really learned a lot from them about kind of what life is really like and what things are really important, and it served and stayed with me.
What did they think when grandson and nephew went off to Harvard?
I think they were very proud and very worried that I would, pick up bad habits off there in Cambridge. But no, I think they were all proud and wished me well. Now, I worked in the local drugstore. It was a Rexall pharmacy. That was my job when I was in high school. And the pharmacist there was a very conservative gentleman who was, absolutely convinced that I had become a communist because I was going off to this thing. And it was kind of odd because just the fact of my having, gone to one of these liberal northeastern universities became a real barrier between two people who'd gotten along very, very well for a long time.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a forest ranger. You said you'd get some things out. I wanted to be a forest ranger first, and then I really wanted to be a geologist.
Huh.
And when I discovered, however, that almost all geologists have jobs working for oil companies, and so I decided that probably was not, what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. But the sciences in some form had always interested me.
Was there a role model outside of your family in the small town?
I had several, I think, really good teachers in high school. One of them, a man named Leo Fabers, I still see. He was only a few years older than I was when I was in high school, and he was certainly a big influence on me.
What kind of teacher?
He was a social studies teacher, history. And Mary Arnold, who was the science teacher, taught biology and chemistry and all those kinds of things.
What made them special teachers?
I think just because they took an interest in me, and they were both very tough on me. They're two of the ones that I've stayed in touch with. Ms. Arnold has now passed away, but
Were you a good student?
I was a good student in high school. Yeah, I was a mediocre student in college.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Hero growing up?
Pardon?
Did you have a hero growing up?
I don't think so. No.
Did you have a hero later in life?
I don't think so.
No hero. Why Harvard? How'd you get to Harvard?
I had always, where I grew up was not too far, probably 50 or 60 miles from Cornell in Ithaca, New York. Mm-hmm. And I'd always kind of assumed that was where I would go. And an interesting thing, no one from my school, Red Jacket Central, had ever gone to an Ivy League college before. No one. That's what they told me. I haven't gone back and researched every year leading up to that. But
it's a good story.
But almost on a Harvard was in the news because John Kennedy was president and so on, and almost on a whim, I applied sort of late to Harvard, and went down and had an interview down there and got in, and so that was where I wanted to go, and I think it was a good choice, but
was it hard to get in from Red Jacket Central?
I may have been the beneficiary of an early affirmative action program on someone's part.
Where did the name Red Jacket Central come from?
It's actually named after a trader. It's an Iroquois Indian who sided with the British in the American Revolution and got for his trouble a red jacket. And so the school is named after a trader. What else?
Was that the logo and mascot of the school?
Yeah. Red jacket. Segoya Watha was his Indian name for anyone who's.
What'd you do extracurricularly
if that's a word, at Red Jacket Central?
The only sport I did was I ran track. And this was a small school. I mean, we didn't have a lot of what you think of here. I mean, my graduating class was 39 people.
Wow.
And so, there were the usual clubs in the sense of there was a band, and I was part of the band, and there was a chorus, and I was part of the chorus, and so on. But some of the other kinds of things you might think of as broader extracurricular just really were not there. But I was certainly very active, and I was class president. I think it might have been all 4 years of my time in high school.
Wow.
And stuff like that. So I mean, I wasn't a complete nerd or anything like that. Not like today.
Why would we think that? What'd you play in the band?
The baritone, euphonium, baritone. Yeah.
Still play any musical instruments?
I learned to play piano growing up. We have a piano at home, and I will once in a long time go down and open up some of the old piano books, but I don't claim to play it.
Okay. So you said you were a mediocre student at Harvard. What's that mean?
I think it just means. I mean, it just means it was such. One of the reasons that I spent so much time as governor with these issues of college graduation and so on was just remembering what it was like to come from a small town with this to a place like Harvard, and my high school physics teacher was the football coach, and everybody else who I knew over there had been to Andover for the last 4 years, or Exeter for the last 4 years, and now had taken 3 years of calculus at this point, and these kinds of things. It's such. I mean, I've never been through anything like that in my life, before or since. It was just such a difficult transition, and and I didn't like it all that well, and ended up dropping out for a year and then coming back in and finishing.
Dropped out of Harvard for a year?
For 1 year.
Why?
I just.
Population of Harvard must have been more than population of the small town you were from.
Population of my class was more than the population of the town. That's right. That's right. But I took a year off and went down and worked in Arecibo in Puerto Rico at the radio telescope down there, and then came back and finished up.
Was that hard going back?
No, I mean I wanted to finish up and do that, but.
Did you think about going somewhere else?
Not really.
Forest ranger to geologist to physics.
Yeah.
How'd you get to physics?
Remember that I
I
was.
say that with a slur because that's just hard. Physics is hard for me to imagine.
Well, it's been very helpful to me in my job as governor. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
You'll have to explain that next.
yeah, no, I mean, I was kind of coming of age and starting to think about these things when Sputnik went up. And that was a time in which I mean, lots of people were being pushed into scientific careers and so on. And I've always loved it. I mean, I've always liked math and science and so on. And I really liked physics. And it seemed like a natural kind of thing to do. I also decided along the way that was not something that I wanted to do the rest of my life, and didn't particularly want to go to graduate school in it or something like that. So. But I really enjoyed it, and I really actually do. I've told what must be a generation or two now of young people that, a good solid training in the hard sciences, no matter what you want to do, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it'll teach you discipline and thinking and ways of thinking about things, ways of seeing problems as multi-step problems that will serve you if you want to. Be a business executive or go into, you name anything else, and so from that standpoint, I think it was certainly a very valuable thing to do.
So one very practical application of physics to being governor.
Well, it's one of the things that I've mentioned is you've been around public life so long, that it's very sort of immediately transactional. Some problem gets in the newspapers, and you go to work on it and solve it, and everything's got to be done in 3 weeks. And go on to the next kind of thing. It's this very short-term transaction. I think one of the things you learn in studying the sciences is that most real problems, there are multi-steps. You got to figure out how to get from here to there by finding this rock and standing on it, and then the next rock and standing on it. Kind of work your way through that. And I think thinking about problems in that way, not what's the answer, but what's step one of what might be 6 or 7 steps to get from here to there, I actually think has been very helpful to me in both the business world and the political world. If you think about, you know, the big problem that I had in my first term as governor was all the problems with TennCare. And they would not have been soluble by just reaching for a solution, just reaching for some answer at the end of it. I mean, we did that in a very sort of, I think, methodical, step by step. Okay, I got to get to this point first, and now I got to get to this point and work it through. So I think it helps.
Great story. You've mentioned 2 great historical events that people in our era responded to, I think, in a lot of different ways. Do you remember one way or one thought or response you had to Sputnik when it went up?
Well, I thought it was a sign. When I heard about it on the radio, I was actually babysitting for an aunt and uncle of mine working on a model airplane. And I heard it, I had the radio on, and I heard it on the radio. I thought it was a sign. I mean, it was
A sign
a sign that I should go into, you know, the sciences were my thing, and so on. But it was, for anyone who's old enough out here to remember that, I mean, it was an existential moment for this country. And I mean, it was the first chink in a long time in the armor that we were the best at everything forever.
I kept a log and started building rockets in the backyard, but I didn't go into physics. You mentioned John F. Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
You remember a thought or a response to Kennedy's presidency and then ultimately his assassination?
Yeah, I don't remember when I was in high school and for the first years in college, I really had no interest in politics. I mean, I wouldn't have called myself a Democrat or Republican, and so on. And I think the thing that what I remember about Kennedy was just, you know, that I admired him and his style, and at a time when you're starting to form your beliefs about things. You know, I think he was evidence that politics is something that good people can do. There's nothing, you know, if I had come of age at maybe a different point in subsequent history and so on, I might have felt very differently about it. But it was just something that stayed with me, and when the opportunity, you know, came, we'll see there. I mean, I think one of the things that most disturbs me about what's going on right now in Washington, of which I have little, you know, feelings of any warmth toward, you know, I think one of the long-term things would be, I think there's going to be a whole generation of young people who are going to be very turned off from the idea of public service and elective office, and you know, and the consequences of that will be, you know, very, very great over the longer term.
The assassination?
I mean, I remember it as being I remember it like everyone remember where I was when I heard about it and all those kinds of things. But I don't think that wasn't for me anyway, just some sort of major moment or turn. It was obviously a major news event and a tragic turn of events and so on, but I don't remember it as deeply affecting me. And so his death did not as deeply affect me as his life did. And
that's a good segue. What drew you to politics?
I guess there's first of all, anybody that does this stuff, as you well know, runs for elected office, there's something wrong with you somewhere.
Absolutely.
Okay, I mean, there's something that doesn't quite hook up.
So what's wrong with you?
Yeah, well, I'm not quite sure, but I'm still trying to figure it out. But it was something that I always kind of after I kind of thought I'd like to do. And I think it's more a desire for action, that I liked things having to do with public policy and so on, but I wanted to be an actor, not a bystander or something else like that. You wanted to go out and sort of make things happen. I mean, to me, one of the things I think is really important for anybody, for the good life, is to be effective. I mean, to do things that change something in the world in some way. And if you're interested in these issues of public policy and what kind of opportunities are there for people and how the country works, And you want to be an actor. I mean, elected office is a very effective way of doing that.
What's been the most gratifying thing about your political life?
Being able to do something for kids. I mean, if you're so during the 8 years that I was governor, I would say unfortunately, or got sidetracked for probably 3 of those on all these Medicaid issues and problems, and it just kind of consumed all the oxygen in the air for a period of time there. But once we got through that, I mean, we made huge changes in K through 12 education in the state in a host of different kinds of ways, for everything from the whole standards movement and dramatically changing the standards in the state, which are now, they used to be ranked 49th, they're now ranked second in the country, behind Massachusetts. And and then also in higher education, in particular, focusing on these issues of college graduation. I mean, a lot of what we did was to do things like change the funding formula to put more emphasis on the number of kids who get through it and get their degrees, and less on how many seats are warmed in October of each fall. And those are all things that grow very much out of the stuff I just been talking to you about. And I think the chance to do that. I think job number one of any grown up is to try to make things a little better for the next generation coming along. And you do that in some ways as a parent, you do that in some ways as a citizen. But if you get in government, I think one of the very effective ways of doing that really has got some reach and some scope, are the things you do with the educational system.
Hardest thing about life in politics?
Oh, it was interesting. It changed a little bit. When I was mayor, I always worried so much about, you always get some newspaper headline that said you're an idiot in so many words or something like that. And that was when Ben was young, our son was young. And it always really bothered me. He would see that and not think well of his father or something like that. And then, of course, by the time I got to be governor, he was long past that, and we, could joke about, those kinds of things. But I think during the time I was mayor, just sort of this sort of incessant criticism that you get was in some ways the hardest thing. And it actually probably helped when I got to be governor. I was pretty well inured to that, and you just sort of charge ahead and go ahead and do your thing.
Couple more questions along this line, then I'm coming to you, so be thinking about your question. You've won some races, you lost some races. What did you learn from the losses?
Yeah, different things. The first time, if you remember, I ran for mayor of Nashville in 1987 and lost. Okay, and then I ran for Congress and lost. I hate to remind everybody again of all this, but I would say in both of those cases, I just learned a lot about the mechanics of running for office. These are the things you've got to do. These are the relationships you've got to build, and so on and so forth. I ran for governor in 1994, basically because Ned McWhorter took me aside and told me I was going to do that. And I hadn't yet learned that you can say no to governors just as well as anybody else. But I think the lesson was more subtle and more sophisticated in that, 94 was a bad year, it turned out, for any Democrat to be running for office. They fell like matched, cordwood all over the country. But what I discovered is just, is that it's so easy to let people build a narrative around you that's not right. I came into it, and it was just so easy for my opponent, it was Don Sundquist, obviously, to build this narrative. Well, here's this guy, and he's not from here, and he was a big city mayor, and he raised taxes as a big city mayor, and he doesn't talk like we do. He's just not one of us. Okay, and so, and it really stuck in my mind because that narrative, it's sold. There was a lot of people that say, yeah, that that paints a picture which I can understand of this guy. So when I ran in the 2002 election, starting in 2001, I spent an enormous amount of time just making sure that I had much better control over the narrative. Before that race heated up at all, which is usually about a year out. It's after after Thanksgiving, people start looking forward to next fall's elections. It's happening right now. By that time, I had spent a year in a van going around the state talking to any 4 people who would talk to me. Okay. And I started out doing it for reasons of saying, well, look, I'm not going to get pushed with this narrative because I'm from just as small a town as the rest of these, as all these towns out here are. In fact, upstate New York is probably more rural than most parts of Tennessee are today. The people who run these towns I know perfectly well. They're my aunts and uncles and cousins and everything else. And I'm just going to show people that who I am. And I think that very much helped in terms of not letting that narrative get started the next time around. But the other thing about it is interesting is I think it made me a much better governor. You just got much more understanding about the way people think about things than you do by reading polls or any of those other kinds of things. And when you're going out and doing that, this is not meeting with Democratic activists. This is meeting with there's lots of people I sat down in their living rooms with who I think probably voted for me in the end, who are members of the Tea Party today. And it just it reminds me. I think the hope we have today is we have a political system that takes these policy issues and kind of makes a cartoon out of them. It simplifies them and makes them into line drawings, and you got to squash them around so they fit in some ideological niche, or they fit some narrative of conflict between 2 people or 2 organizations or something like that. And what I discovered, I think it's something I already knew, but discovered, I really believe, is I just think real people are have a much more textured and a much richer view of these political issues than that. I'll give you an example I was thinking about the other day. When I ran for re-election, we have in Tennessee, we have 3 members of Congress who are members of the Tea Party, okay? And the caucus, and we got a couple others who easily could be. We've got 3 members of the Tea Party, and I was thinking about this, and I looked it up, and they represent 55 counties, mostly rural in the state of Tennessee, okay? When I ran for re-election, I won every one of those 55 counties. In a very short time, and I'm, this guy who's from the Northeast and doesn't talk exactly like everyone does in those counties. Huh? Not Tea Party. Definitely not Tea Party, and, has got some fairly liberal views about some different kinds of things and so on. And a short time later, they sent people overwhelmingly to Washington who joined the Tea Party caucus. And I don't think that's because, by the tens of thousands, they all had epiphanies during that, intervening 2 years. I just think it's that what the lesson to me is that have got much richer views about these political issues and what they want in terms of representation than we try to force them into with these, categorizing everything and putting everything into, it's got to be Democrat or Republican or liberal or conservative.
It's about the candidate at the end of the day.
It's about the candidate, and I even think their views of the issues are much more nuanced than that. I certainly like anybody in politics, we use polls a lot, but I was struck with just kind of what a rough cut they are of what the real world really is like out there. They're just, a very coarse kind of measure of it. And to me, that's the hope. I just think some of these difficult problems that we have to solve, things like these deficit issues, which I think are terribly important to the country. I think the hope for the solution is that I think most Americans have got much richer, more nuanced views than the Congress gives them credit for, and at some point somebody will come along and take advantage of that and get the problem solved.
You obviously relished serving.
Mm-hmm.
Did you like being a candidate? Did you like campaigning?
I didn't start out. By the time I got running for governor, I liked campaigning too. The campaigning is very. It's just hard. It's long and it's hard and the level of respect you get as a candidate for governor is about 0.5% of the level of respect you get as the actual governor, or 0.5% of what you got as you were mayor. I mean, once you step out there as a candidate, you become sort of this scum for a while, and then you either win or lose. But a lot of parts of campaigning I really liked, and doing it. But I have to be. I mean, I loved the job of governor. That's the best job I've ever had in terms of enjoyment and complexity and everything else.
What surprised you most about being governor?
There are probably a lot of things. Everybody has this tendency to reference themselves to kind of like what's around you. I always thought, and to a certain extent it was more true with the council in Nashville, but I always thought that the representatives and the senators would be really solid representatives of their districts and the values in those districts. And what I found is, man, you get into Nashville and everything changes. I mean, it's just everyone gets, you live in this pressure cooker about a mile circle around the state capitol, and somehow you think that's the real world. And that, and the games that go on there, which have throughout our history, are the real world out there. And the members of the legislature that I came to really admire more than anything else were the ones, irregardless of their particular political beliefs, the ones that I thought really were still very much grounded in the kind of set of values that were in the districts that they came from, and eschewed that kind of gamesmanship and for its own sake.
What keeps you grounded?
Andrea.
Andrea?
Is that correct?
Right answer anyway, right?
Yeah. It's now I just it's just coming. I just keep going back and think about these people I was brought up with and what would be important to them and so on, and I remember when I would come back from Harvard with the latest, greatest idea about something or other and explain to some of these family members. I mean, sometimes they'd say okay, but sometimes they'd look at you and say, you might want to think a little more about that one. And
you remember a specific example?
I don't know.
Okay. Questions? Come on, surely there are questions.
Did you ever seriously consider running for national office, and if so, which one?
No, I really don't think so. When I was during the time that I was governor, there was at least one Senate seat that opened up that I certainly would have been a viable candidate for. The one that Bob Corker holds today, and he and I talked about it. I mean, it's at the time, and the more I thought about it, when I was in college, I would have told you being a U.S. Senator was the ultimate job in the world, and I've come 180 degrees from that view now, where I think that being mayor or being governor is a far better job than being part of that. Being part of that, I found that I really liked the executive jobs. I mean. Better than the legislative jobs. I mean, it's just a personality thing. You get to act and take responsibility for your actions, and make some mistakes and whatever. And it's very different from the world of a legislative body. So I just I thought for about 5 minutes, literally, and just said, no, that's not my future. I wouldn't like being there. They wouldn't like my being there. I think I'm much better off just doing this. And plus the fact that I never thought that I wanted to have a pure career in politics. I've spent a long time before I ran for office, and I'm not Cincinnati. I didn't spend 4 days down here. I spent 16 years in these things. But I think it's okay to do that for a part of your life, and then turn around and go on and do some other things. I mean. That seems to be closer to what the founders of the country kind of expected than some of what goes on today.
You mentioned Corker, you mentioned Ned. I know you've got a great relationship with Alexander and a good relationship with Haslam. which I think is something a little unique in Tennessee, the bipartisan relationships over the years. Comment on that.
I think it's really, no, I think it's been very good. I mean, all of the people who you just mentioned, I think share and which I hope I do too, just share the view that elections are one thing, but the day you get sworn in as governor or senator, you are the governor or senator for all of the people of the state of Tennessee, whether they voted for you or not. And I think if you just hang on to that attitude and also believe that no matter where somebody is on the political spectrum or how much they like or dislike you, they may well have something to contribute valuable to any given discussion. Most really interesting solutions to any problem take pieces from different places to get them from there, and I think it's been one of the really healthy things. I've had a little bit of a chance, not as much by far as I would have liked to get to know Howard Baker since over this time, who just is almost the model of that way of looking at the world, and we need a lot more people like him.
Yeah. Another question. If you've got a question, raise your hand. The mic will come to you. And if it's not on, just speak up.
Okay, I had a question about, you came to Nashville and started a business almost from scratch. How did you do that, and what advice would you give to a recent college graduate starting in Nashville now?
Well, when I came to Nashville, as I described it, I didn't have a job, and it took me 6 or 8 months to get a job, and it was with hospital affiliates out here on West End Avenue. And I worked there for about 3 years. And I'd always wanted to start I'd done a lot of little entrepreneurial things over the years. For example, even while I was in Nashville here, I sold lap boards, which are these things I would make out of a piece of plywood to take and be able to write letters on and put little ads in the national newspapers and ship the lap boards off to people. So I've always done these little things like that. It kind of comes out of when I was growing up. I used to sell Christmas cards and white cloverine brand salve and grit newspapers and all that kind of stuff in the neighborhoods. And so I'd always wanted to do that, and I'd always been talking about it. And I think the precipitating factor was the birth of our son, Ben. He was born in June of 1980, and for everyone who's been through the experience, there's nothing quite like having a child to make you acutely aware of your own mortality and the fact that time is moving on. And so Andrea finally just said to me, if you want to do it, do it. If you don't, be quiet. And she was nicer than that, but I'm summarizing it here. Stuff like that, that it really is, if something you really want to do, do it. We're okay, and so on. So I just quit a perfectly good job and sort of set up shop. Initially literally on the kitchen table, and then fairly quickly in a little office over on White Bridge Road, and started trying to make it all work. And fortunately for me and for her and for Ben and others, it did.
Good question. Another one?
And I want to say one thing. The second thing, you asked the question about what advice would you give. And I think the advice is implicit in that, but the advice is just do it. I've seen people, you can plan things out forever and you can analyze things and make 150-page business plans and everything else. The people who I know who successfully do it, they just walk out the door one day and start doing it, and it never turns out like those business plans or anything else. I really think that the rise of the venture capital industry has done more to damage entrepreneurial spirit in this country than anything else. Just because you have all this generation of people who think you can't do anything without a 40-page business plan and $5 million and all this kind of stuff. And all the big successful companies you can think of started in very different ways. That's not how Hewlett-Packard or Apple or any of these. They all started with just somebody who stepped out the door one day and said, we're going to build a business, and I'm going to, it's going to take twists and turns, and we're going to figure out how to do it. So just do it.
Great thought. Another question?
My question is, so Mayor Ben West opposed the consolidation of the metropolitan, or
Right.
the consolidation of the government. My question is, do you think he was just on the wrong side of history, or did he foresee some inefficiencies or overreach coming down the pike, or better put, what do you think of our local government today?
I never knew Mayor West, so I don't have any direct knowledge of that. I think the consolidated government has been a wonderful thing for Nashville from a couple of standpoints. Number one, by putting together the kind of economic region into a single political vehicle, I really think you make decisions a lot easier. I think back about things like, think about recruiting the Titans to come here. I mean, that was a project with more moving parts and things that could go wrong. I honestly believe that if we'd had a city government and a county government that had to coordinate to get it done, it never would have happened. Just the fact of there's a single point to negotiate. I mean, you've got a mayor to negotiate with, you got a single city council, there's not a lot of interplay going on. I think makes those difficult things easier in that regard. And second of all, I just think it's been more efficient. I mean, I have not looked it up recently, but for all the time I was mayor, and I think all the time I was governor, Nashville had a lower tax rate than the other major cities in the state. Dramatically lower than Memphis, and it was lower than the others. And I think that partly reflects the fact that you've got one police department, not a police department, and a sheriff's department. You've got a single public works entity. You've got a lot of these things consolidated. You've got a single fire department. A lot of these things consolidated, and I just think it's a more efficient way to do it. And I think it also helped Nashville avoid. We're getting a little bit of that now, but I think it also helped Nashville to avoid, this future that some cities find themselves in, where you have this sort of poor inner city, which is not doing well, and the surrounding suburbs. I mean, from a very early time, we were all in it together in Nashville, and obviously the growth of Williamson County in particular has put some pressure on that concept. But I think it really helped this city through a lot of decades.
Other question?
Governor, what are your thoughts on the Affordable Care Act as it relates to Tennessee?
On the what?
On the Affordable Care Act?
Well, look, I mean, first of all, I admitted earlier that I may not always be the best stand-in line right up with everyone Democrat. I don't happen to be an admirer of the Affordable Care Act, for a number of reasons we can go into and doing it. I start out by saying that for anybody who tackles this problem, anybody who's willing to put their hands around it, whether it be Mitt Romney in Massachusetts or Barack Obama as president, first of all, they have my respect for even trying to grab a hold of such a difficult kind of issue. But having said that, it's the law. I mean, it's been passed. It's not going to be repealed. It's not going to be repealed, until and unless there are 60 Republican senators and a majority in the House. And by that time, if that happens again in my lifetime, there'll be so many people on the Affordable Care Act that it's not going to be practical to repeal it anyway. So I just think the task now is to stop agonizing and gnashing teeth and everything about it and get on with the subject of, okay, it's not perfect by a long shot. What do you got to do to fix it? Well, what do you got to do to make things work better, and get on with doing that? I think unfortunately, and it may be true as long as as President Obama is president, that the sort of personal animosity that exists in some parts of the country against him, it just kind of overrides, I think, our better judgment sometimes on those on those things, which I think you can see right here in things like our state not doing these exchanges and leaving it to the federal government. I mean, when I talk to people about that who are conservative Republicans, I said, look, if you really believe in this notion that the federal government ought to be small and keep its fingers out of things, why would you want to turn over to them, an enormous amount of control over the entire healthcare industry in your state? Why wouldn't you keep that in your own hands and just forget about who started it over here? The reality is we've got this and we've got to make it work, and you ought to take some control and make it work right.
We could spend another program on that, but I want to turn to something else. You started in a VW Rabbit.
Yep.
I heard as you left the governor's office, you had your eye on a different vehicle.
What, a 57 Chevy convertible? I'm on one of those. Yet,
You do have one?
no, I don't.
I heard a Porsche.
Well, you know, you like to sort of fantasize about those things, but it's like most things. You should probably
Andrea
stop.
kept you
You
grounded?
should probably stop with the fantasy, and stop it with it being a fantasy, and not go from there.
So you never got the Porsche?
Nah.
What do you drive now?
So I've got a truck and a Mercedes.
I also heard while you were governor, there were a couple of places that were favorites of yours that were kind of unexpected.
What would they be?
The Waffle House,
Yeah, I love the Waffle House.
favorite place to eat?
Huh? I wouldn't say it's my favorite place to eat, but I actually like the Waffle House not so much for the food as, we talked about this thing about staying grounded. I mean, there is nobody in America that works harder than some of those waitresses
true.
in the Waffle House and so on. And if you want to figure out what's really going on, talking to them is one of the best things you can do.
That's a great point. Home Depot.
Oh, I love Home Depot. Yeah, I do. It's just, it's a sort of, it's a hardware store, just blown up to
Steroids.
supersize and
Yeah.
steroids and so on. No, I can
So-
definitely be found at the Bellevue Home Depot.
And what are you looking for?
It doesn't really matter. It just, you go in there, and maybe you need some wood screws. I don't know. So you get them, take them home. So,
What do you do to relax?
I mean, a lot of different things. I enjoy reading and I do some of that. I've always enjoyed outdoor things, and when I've been able to, it's a little harder, to do that. We've got a place out west that we go to and relax and do things there. But
Favorite book?
I mean, I've got lots of them. I like lots of different kinds of
What are you
books.
reading currently?
Let's see. I'm just about halfway through a book by Jacques Barzun called The Age of Decadence, which he wrote about 15 years ago. About he's a historian. It was at Columbia. He's passed away now. About just sort of it's a history of sort of Western civilization from the Age of Enlightenment to the current age, and it's a very perceptive book. And that's what I'm in the middle of right now.
Escapist reading.
Anything with swords or lasers.
Okay.
It's
Do you watch TV?
very little, very little.
Movies?
There's no TV people in the room, are there?
There may be, but that's okay.
I don't know.
Movies?
No, not so much. I mean, once in a while.
Being a grandfather?
That is possibly the best thing in the world. As we were talking a little bit before we came out here, and I was telling you that when you're going to be a grandfather, everyone tells you, "Oh, this is really, really great, and you're going to really enjoy it." And Andy and I would nod our heads and say, "Yeah, I'm sure that's right. It is really, really great." And I am, at least as dedicated to Parker going on age 3 as you are to your own children, it's just it really is wonderful. And of course, having them in Nashville, they live over in East Nashville. Having them in Nashville is a wonderful addition. It's something that's very different than if they were in New York or San Francisco or something.
Favorite grandfather moment so far?
Oh, I just like when Parker comes to the house. She'll come down to the library where I've got an office down there, and she'll come in and we'll sit down on the couch and either read a book together, or increasingly she's wanted to use my iPad. It stuns me that someone who's not yet 3 can turn on the iPad, select the proper program she wants to play with or something like that and do it. But
Fantastic, isn't it?
but they can do it. But it's just it's just those kinds of little things that I really enjoy with her.
It's often in your bio, but I don't think a lot of people realize when it says artist, it really means artist. Talk to us about your painting.
Well, I had when Ben and I, our son and I, one year were out, we used to go camping every year. And we'd go out for a number of years. We went out to Colorado and would go around to the ghost towns out there and stuff. And I tried one year buying some pencils and a pad because I was going to draw a couple of these old buildings. It is much harder than it looks. And so I came back, I decided I wanted to learn how to draw. And I found somebody in Nashville here who was a good artist and was willing to give lessons, and I did that for about 6 months. Then he said, "You need to take up painting," and so I did, and I really enjoyed it. And it's been up and down. I'm not doing a lot of it right now, but it's something I really wish I'd taken up much earlier in life. You know, when I was in high school, art was one of those classes you took along with shop if you weren't going to go to college. And I really wish so I didn't take art. When I was, on the college track. And I really wish that I had, because I think it would have given me a lot of enjoyment in a lot of different ways over the course of my life. But it's never too late.
Thank you for being here. We could go on for another hour, but I promised to quit on time.
All right.
Thank you for being here, and look forward to seeing you at the next Now That You Ask. Thanks for coming.